And let's bring a live audience in. Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to get started in just a minute. Those of you watching on YouTube. And we have our attendees coming in. Thanks for joining us, everybody. It's going to be a minute here to make everybody, or allow everyone to come in. Okay, welcome to the Friday webinar, everybody. I'm Executive Director Derek Auger. Andrew Harbridge has joined me here today from Harbridge Publishing House. And we're excited to bring you the final webinar for the academic year. We're going to continue these into September. And I was just thinking back, we've done 2 full years on YouTube now. And welcome to those of you who happen to be watching on the YouTube channel. We're going to review that in a moment, just to review some of the sessions we've had over the past year. But I think we also had a year before that where we were just exclusively on Zoom, and I was sending out replay recordings. So we have 3 full years of webinars now, which is really great. A little more than 2 years worth of those, the recordings live on the YouTube channel, which is really wonderful. Feel free to type into the chat box there. I see there's lots of good things coming through there already. If anyone has any questions as we go along today, maybe throw them in the Q&A. It's going to be a little easier for me to spot that today. I'm in a slightly different location in front of my piano today, so I apologize, the lighting's not quite the same, but optimized for sound, because later on we want to give you a sneak peek at what's coming in the new Mosaics Collection Piano Repertoire series that we hope to launch in a couple of months' time, sometime through the summer. Pre-grade 1 through grade 8 piano, and these are going to replace the old New Millennium series books, which are pretty much out of print now, but they're going to start to disappear from store shelves. And it'll take a while, it'll take quite a few months, maybe even a couple of years, depending where you are, to see those books fully disappear. Anyway, welcome to the last show here. I want to go over YouTube channel first and just do a quick recap at some of the sessions. I know a lot of you join us every week keenly, and just want to recap a little bit, maybe some of the things you missed. I know a lot of people, they don't quite have a chance to get into the YouTube channel and watch the replays you want to watch, and maybe that's something you like to do over the summer. So I'm just going to recap a little bit where we've been. Here's what our YouTube channel looks like when you go there to the home page. And YouTube I find a little bit confusing, because the top row for you are things that YouTube has selected for you to take a look at. They can be from any time. The videos play all past live streams, new teacher webinars, all show up on the home page. But the only way really to get to, there's only a couple of ways to get to all the webinars in order, if that's how you prefer. One is to go to playlists, and maybe you didn't see me select that. There's a menu just below the header of the YouTube channel page that says playlists. And we've got different playlists here. All the webinars are sorted through here, but I've got one in the top right corner called Webinar Replays. And if I view full playlist below that, now we get everything in order. So 2 weeks ago we had Christopher Norton talking about improvisation. You could view that. That was a really good session. Heather Smith's Silent Film Celebration from the US, a really neat thing, a way to replace your recitals, your piano recitals, with a silent film recital. And this is where your students will play the incidental music and prepare ahead of time. Lots of prep goes into that. But Silent Film Celebration, you can go to their website and download packages if you want to organize that yourself. It's a great way, I think. I haven't seen it in action myself, but she gave us a very convincing presentation, so I'd encourage those of you to check that out for a real good historical look at silent films. Christopher Norton gave 2 sessions on micro lessons in the past couple of months, the second of which you see right before that. I spoke about launching voice and digital guitar badges, or voice and guitar digital badges, and I think that's our best webinar today. We just launched a teacher survey through SurveyMonkey, and I know well over 100 of you have already filled that out. That's really great. We're going to keep that running for the next couple of weeks. I'll hit you one more time in your email. We're going to put the link on social media, the Conservatory Canada Teachers Facebook page, so that you can get in there and give us the feedback if you want. But the very last question, you can leave your name and email address if you want to be entered in a free draw to win the entire Mosaics Collection series when it comes available in the summer. That's 9 books, pre-grade 1 to grade 8. We'll select 3 winners to win a whole package, and we'll ship those out to you. So we're excited for that, and we've received a lot of great feedback already. Digital badges is something that we haven't seen a huge uptake with yet. We're trying to market those to you so you understand what they are. But what you're telling us in the survey so far is that you are very much interested in digital badges. It's just going to take you a little bit of time to get to them, see what they're like, and understand them fully before you can start using them. Brock Chart, a really good US composer who gave us a great webinar a couple of months ago, or a little over a month ago now. I've been using his music quite a bit, and we're going to feature 2 of his pieces in the new Mosaic series. Dr. Scott Price, Autism and Piano Study, a really great book that he published last year. He talks about that book, and we're hoping to have him back on in the fall to follow up on that and give us a little bit more information. Andrew and I gave the first piano publication update about 2 months ago, and we're going to continue that later today as the main part of this session. There's the Christopher Norton micro lessons. Eleanor Gummer and Cecile DeRosier have been giving us sessions for the past 2+ years now on music by women composers. They've been doing research into unearthing forgotten and suppressed music over history, and Eleanor, through her One Eye Publications, has been publishing this. And so they've been in the habit of giving us a webinar at least every 2 months over the past couple of years. So they have their own dedicated playlist, and you'll see their many webinars scattered throughout the whole series here. I would encourage you to check out Alessandra DiCenzo's webinar on Star Factor. That's motivating your students to practice. Some really innovative ideas. She's got great ideas. She enacts them beautifully in her studio. Sometimes you'll see me with a Q&A update. George, who's on this webinar, and George, maybe he can come on later. He might make a cameo appearance for us. He's working on getting all of the Mosaics publications into SuperScore for us, and also doing a lot of the editing. And him and Dr. Stella Sick did a great webinar on the waltz. I've been showing that to some of my students, especially the older students, and they found it very enlightening. Dr. Arthur Uhl talks about the Clementi Sonatinas with George, and we're hoping to have Dr. Uhl back on in the fall as well. He's got some other ideas for us that he'd like to present. But these unknown sonatinas, that's a really great webinar, and you're going to see some of these sonatina movements in the new Mosaics collection. And they don't blow our minds, but they come close in terms of some of the ideas that we've never seen published that perhaps ought to be, and they make a great case in that webinar for why we should consider this version of the Clementi Sonatinas. George talks about the life and music of Ignatius Sancho. Alessandra talked about sight reading research. We have a live stream of our convocation and awards ceremony that took place last November in London, Ontario. That's one of our better watched or not really a webinar, but sessions. There's more music there from Cecile and Eleanor. Piano Safari, anyone that uses Piano Safari beginner method with their students, there's a great webinar there. Anyone that's curious about it, we had the creators on for an hour-long session. Roland Canada spoke about technology back in the fall. Hosting Zoom exams, this is something that I wish more of you would watch. I know I had a student very recently do a Zoom exam, and for the first time in a while, we had to default to the telephone because their connectivity speed wasn't good enough. And honestly, I couldn't hear the nuances or dynamics. I could hear that he was playing with rhythm. I could hear that he was playing with articulation. But I think the assessment is starting to suffer a little bit in many cases because students aren't testing the Zoom platform before they go ahead and dive in. And a lot of you too, the MIDI exams, we can't forget about that. If your students are playing on digital pianos from home, the best solution is to use George Litter's MIDI technology, the Internet MIDI software. It's only $39 US. You download that to a laptop. We help you get started with it. It's not that hard. And then your students can be heard perfectly. To me, that's a better solution. For acoustic pianos, we're using Zoom, and I just think that webinar there on hosting Zoom exams is a great way to refresh on what you ought to be considering with your students if you're going to have them doing Zoom exams from their home. Because what we're hearing by and large is a bit questionable sometimes, and students generally aren't well prepared to broadcast decent quality audio. And there are a few simple things they can do to make that process better. I think going back here, we're going back into last year now with Music for Young Children. Eleanor comes on with her Piano Kids beginner method, which is a really great webinar. And then we're into stuff from the previous year, but I just wanted to give you a quick recap over the year if you want to take a look and catch up on some of the sessions. This is where you find them in the webinar replays playlist. Back on the home page, sometimes you can also click on the live tab, and that'll give you chronologically all the live streams that took place. Once in a while, the live stream, something doesn't quite work, and I always have a backup going in the background, and the backup gets put on here, but it doesn't get put on the live playlist, so you're going to see the odd one disappear. Videos themselves that get uploaded, if I go from latest to oldest, for some reason it doesn't want to work. So this is there, but they're not in order, unfortunately. Oh, mock exams. That's something that some of you asked about in the survey. There are 4 mock exams for those that aren't sure. It has its own dedicated playlist, and I'd encourage anyone to see that. Even our examiners watch those just to fully understand what we're doing. But the mock exam playlists are here if you want to see the exam itself, and then the webinar replay where I spend about 40 minutes going into detail about how we assess things on the exam. So that's a little bit about the YouTube channel. We're heading into our session now. Our June session exams actually start tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland. So there are a few sessions where people realize that the high school students want to get these exams, our piano exams, out of the way a bit earlier. So we have several sessions happening starting tomorrow and then into next week before they kick in earnest, usually around June 7th, I believe it is this year, running right through to about June 26th. During that whole time, that only represents about, I'd say, 28% of our students that want exams in person. The other 70+% are doing their exams on Zoom on a flex basis, where you can have full control more or less of what day and time you want to have your exam with any of our e-examiners online. Most of the students are doing that, and so again, the one thing I caution teachers to share with their students if they're doing them at home is check that Zoom connection, make sure the audio settings are working well, make sure the student has the microphone open with original sound like I do right now. Even though I'm talking, it still sounds okay. I use a different microphone for podcasting than I do recording or playing the piano, which I'm going to do a little bit later today, so that's why I have a different mic on. I may sound a little bit louder or a little bit different to you than I normally do, but those are some of the things you want to work out with your students. And I think for myself, when I do the odd exam from a studio here, I make sure my students do it here with me so I can control the audio, because we tend to use the acoustic piano. They're just more familiar with it. And so with that, I want to make sure I have the settings set up the right way so that they're heard carefully. So again, we're leaning on teachers to get that information out to students. We're finding by and large they don't test that ahead of time, and most of them we have to spend a good 5 minutes trying to figure out whether it's a different device, because some of them are trying to use a mobile device, which isn't honestly the best thing, or they have a laptop, they're not using their best laptop, they don't have the audio settings figured out, and sometimes, like yesterday, I had to spend 15 minutes with a student, and eventually we ended up on the phone, believe it or not, because their internet speed was only 39 megabits per second download, which just we find isn't enough these days. Incidentally, the MIDI technology, that is enough. I find that works very well. There's something about that MIDI technology that stabilizes the internet speed. So, we're going to have George on later. He says he's okay to come on. Thanks to the many of you that are here live with us today. Thanks to those of you watching the replay after the fact on the YouTube channel. Andrew and I want to talk about the Mosaics Collection a little bit, give you a little bit an idea of what it's going to look like, how it's going to feel, what kind of music we're including, and then I'm going to demonstrate 4 pieces between pre-grade 1 and grade 3 today to give you an idea about our editing process, how we're going about it, how to prepare pieces for exams, and also to give you an idea about what the format for some of the webinars we want to hold in the fall will look like. We want to take the 9 books and give them to you with a lot of detail, so that you can get used to them maybe a little bit more quickly, or if you just want to see what's under the hood before you buy the car. That's another thing that we hope to do for you right from the start. So, first of all, let's look up what these look like, and I'm going to share my screen here so you can see what the books look like. We've got a cover design ready to go, and here it is. For the first time, you get to see what the cover design is going to look like. Each volume is going to be a different color, right from Conservatory Canada Red on level 1 all the way through. I'll show you what they all look like in a moment. But this is what
and there's a prep level too.
What's that? Sorry?
There's a prep level too.
Yes, and you're going to see what that looks like in a second. I'm going to show them the whole thing. This is a cover design that Andrew Harbridge's daughter Carissa created. We went back and forth. We got the logo front and center there, integrated into a mosaic design. The idea behind the design was to try and figure out how to lay our stake firmly in the traditional category, where we still have most of our students doing a lot of traditional music, but a lot of them are using contemporary methods. A lot of them are doing only contemporary music, and so we kind of have a foothold in both realms. And so it's a timeless design that we think shows off the idea of modernity along with our classical roots, but still with leaning forward, looking forward and trying to understand what's coming up. You'll notice the binding, a lot of people might ask, well, what about those coil bindings we used to have? That just adds a ton of cost. But you'll see these particular bindings, and I've seen these because if any of you has anything from Deborah Wanless Music or Andrew Harbridge and the Harbridge Publishing House, they use this box. I call it the box binding. I don't know what's it really called, that kind of binding. Do you have any idea, Andrew?
I was told it's called perfect binding.
Perfect binding. Anyway, these things don't fall apart. I've had quite a few of the, let's say, Christopher Norton Connections books for a while that are bound like this, that started being printed a couple of years ago when Deborah Wanless. And they're somewhat indestructible. They will lay flat. They bend open fairly easily, but it keeps the cost of the book down. As soon as you add a coil binding, I've been told all sorts of things, but it can add as much as $8 to the retail cost of a 96-page book, which is what it does for your current level 7 and 8s that we use on the New Millennium series. So that's how this is going to look. I'm going to share some other ones here with you too. Let's go with how they're going to look. Maybe you get a little idea about what the inside is going to look like. Beautiful fonts, modern fonts, easy to read, black on white, very traditional, the easiest type of thing to read. And you can see how clean the pages look. That's the one thing that strikes me. There's significant borders there and lots of open white space so students don't get too distracted. And you can see a copy of the prep book here in its cover. We kind of leading with, and this was Carissa's idea, going with lighter colors in the early levels. Here's a mosaic of what they all are going to look like. Light blue for book 2, light green for book 3, yellow 4, light orange for 5, and then 6, 7, and 8 we go to the more sort of attractive, darker, saturated colors, the dark green, the dark blue for level 7, and then something that looks kind of like beetroot for level 8. Almost like a purpley, reddish blue color. So we've got things coming along here in the chat box.
Very nice comments. Thank you.
Yeah, very good comments. Anyone has any questions, go ahead and throw them in the Q&A. Do I have any other screenshots? So one thing we're going to have, bios. This is what the bios are going to look like. We feature this in the old New Millennium series, and Andrew's doing a great job putting these bios together with his daughters that work for him. And I think this is going to be a really great addition to the back of the book to show off all the bios of all the composers used.
On the left, we have the iPad version, which will be in color.
Right, okay. So on iPad and SuperScore, they're going to be in color, and then the print version will be black and white.
And you'll notice we have quite a few forgotten composers in here that have really good pieces to offer.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to stop share here for a second. And people often ask that now, what composers are you planning to feature? I'm just going to go through and read some of the names here. We're sort of at the point now where we're in level 4, making some final decisions, even level 5. And so we're working through that. We're a little more than halfway done, but level 6, 7, and 8 promise to take a little bit more time. When I look at grade 1, for example, I'm seeing Mel Bonis in there, the French composer Daquin, and some Diabelli pieces.
Ignatius Sancho.
Gambarini, Elisabetta de Gambarini, Graupner, Haydn, of course. We try to feature Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven whenever we can, and that's harder at the younger levels. Anna Bonn, we do have a Haydn piece in grade 1. Turk, we see a lot of Turk from time to time. And then in the modern section, this is where the idea of mosaics came to us, where we're getting music from all across the country, from other countries, other genres, other styles. It really is a neat patchwork of things. So I'm seeing a piece by Brock Chart there, Nicholas Fairbank, Ian Green, who lives in Hamilton, Andrew Harbridge himself. Sandra Mogensen has done a lot of editing of women's pieces as well, and we're featuring a lot of hers in the younger levels. So we'll have something by Bailoté there, Hedwige Chrétien, Alice Tenier. Christopher Norton will have a cameo piece from the Connection series, generally in each level. Something by Hannah Smith, Jen Smith Lanthier, Nancy Telford, Deborah Wanless, and Julianne Workington in level 1. So some of those names you'll recognize too from the Canadian Contemporary Repertoire series that we started publishing many years ago. And maybe a lot of these, we tried to source pieces that you weren't going to find in many other places, or maybe hadn't previously been published in conservatory albums. I'm looking at level 2. We do have 3 pieces by Beethoven in grade 2. George Lythurst, who's on the call, we're gonna have on in a moment. He also has a few pieces that he has arranged and are in Superscore that we're using in the series. I see Haydn's name there, Leopold Mozart. Bela Bartok will make a cameo appearance, and then when we get into modern music, we've got things like Jesse Brown from Saskatoon, Lee Evans. Maybe Andrew, tell us a little bit about Lee Evans again, and how you found his music to be included here.
Lee Evans is one of our composers, and he just passed away last fall at the age of 90. And we have all of his last compositions and arrangements. So we have quite a few that will be coming out, and we hope to feature those in this new series. And this may be the only place you can get some of them. He's had a long career and published over 100 books, including a lot on how to play jazz and improvise and that sort of thing. So his spouse is looking at getting some of those materials from Hal Leonard and possibly republishing those.
Excellent.
So yeah, it's been great working with Lee, and he's got stuff in the pre-grade 1 album, and he did some nice jazzy duet parts, secondos.
And from what I remember seeing then in the source files, he actually had handwritten all of these compositions, right?
Yes, and Carissa had to engrave them all.
Right. So this is going to be really neat to see some of these for the first time. Other names I'm seeing in grade 2 include Karen Rowell, Lynette Sawatsky, Ernst Schneider, who's out in BC, and Sheila Tyrrell has an O Canada arrangement. You're going to see O Canada in grade 1 and grade 2 at least, in new arrangements that probably previously haven't been seen before. Once we get through grade 3, it's a lot of what you normally would expect, but again, pieces that you maybe haven't normally seen before. And I'm going to pick a few in a minute here to go through with you. By the time we get to grade 4, we can see a lot more of the women composers' influence. Elizabeth Jacques de la Guerre, Elisabetta de Gambarini, I'm seeing there in grade 4. Elizabeth Turner. Who else am I seeing there? Cécile Chaminade, Marie Jael. Francis Johnson is more of a BIPOC composer. Some of those names you're going to see quite a bit as well. And there's another, Amy Beach, the American composer Amy Beach will be featured as well there. And lots of different Canadians, and Canadians you maybe haven't seen published before. So it'll be a great series. I think what I'm going to do, let's bring George on for a second just to comment about what he's seeing in Superscore. George, I'm just going to take you off mute here. Now, did I do that right? George. Okay,
I can see George's still picture.
There we go. Okay, George. Just wondering what your take is so far, because I know you sort of see the final edits of this as it's coming into Superscore. Are you able to hear us?
I am. For some reason, my video's not there, but I can certainly hear you.
Oh, you know what? Let's bring your video on here. I can do that too. There we go. Now you should be able to add your video as well. Will that work?
There we go. Oh, it was there for a second.
I'm joining you from my outdoor office today.
Nice.
And I've been really excited to watch from behind the scenes this whole Mosaics project unfold. I've known Andrew now for quite a number of years, and one of the things that's impressed me about this series, with both his leadership and Derek's, is the fact that they're starting from original sources with all of the materials and then bringing them up into a modern formats for publication, following all of the standard modern rules for how music should properly be notated. And of course, the Superscore editions are especially exciting because they have performances that are included with the music. So here you assign an unfamiliar piece to a student, they get a chance to take it home and hear what it sounds like, and they can listen to it repeatedly, change the tempo, play along with it, mute one hand or the other, things of that nature. So pedagogically, it's going to be wonderful for the students to get immersed through the Superscore app.
Excellent. And that reminds me too, Andrew, about recordings. You're busy working on making recordings of all of the pieces in the series as time goes on here. Where are people going to find and how are they going to be able to use those recordings even outside of the SuperScore app?
Well, I just wanted to mention some of the pieces like by Angelina Gibson and Jesse Brown. They recorded them themselves. They send me what's called a MIDI file, and then I'm able to reproduce them in audio form and in SuperScore. So the audio music will be available in every streaming service we can manage. So it'll be Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal. Who else is there? There's quite a few. You'd be surprised how many streaming services. So students will have access to those.
Right.
And as a teacher, if I could interject, I just find it amazingly exciting when I can assign a piece to a student and they can listen to the composer actually play the work. And I mean, what would we give if we could hear Beethoven playing his music for us? Well, we're not going to have that opportunity, but the contemporary Beethovens, absolutely.
So just see a question pop up here. Are these apps available for non-Apple tech?
Only the streaming things you can get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But
SuperScore app is only for iPad. Is that right, George?
That's correct. That's currently the case.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what we'll do now, George, thanks for joining us and just coming on and saying hi. I saw you there in the background and I thought it would have been nice to have you on today, but I didn't want to bother you too much detail so early in the process. I know we're going to have you on later when we dive into SuperScore app again with the Mosaics Collection.
Well, good to see you. And again, congratulations on this project. And I'm delighted to have a little portion of production contribution along the way. So it's great.
It's significant to us, and we really appreciate it because we know the editing experience that you bring to music is really valuable for us in helping us keep on the straight and narrow path. You're very well pedagogically informed, and so everyone, you know that the editing you're going to get in the final product, and I'll talk about how you can interpret that in a minute, is going to be really sound. So,
okay, we'll go back to lurking in the background.
Okay, thanks, George.
I might add, George, I've never met anyone who knows how to do score writing as well as him. He had a big hand in creating Finale, I believe.
The Finale music software that the professionals use, and many people use. George wrote, I believe, the first handbook, or co-authored the first handbook on Finale a long time ago. It's true. He says it's
true. So we're getting the very best help.
Okay, so a little sneak peek at some of the pieces, how about? And I want to start at pre-grade 1. What I thought I'd do is just demonstrate at the piano a little bit. I'm going to change my microphone settings just slightly so you can hear me a little better. And I'll talk through some of the music a little bit and give you an idea about what we're thinking in terms of the series. And so the first piece I want to feature is actually one that George arranged called, what's that title exactly? Marche pour les Matelots, or Matelot. Is that right? Yeah. And matelot is a slang term for a British soldier. And this comes from an opera by Marin Marais. And there's the piece there that I'm going to play for you so you can see what it looks like. It's going to look different in the PDF version when you get an actual hard copy, but this is how it will look in SuperScore. So you can kind of follow along with what I'm playing there and what I'm thinking. It's a very simple pre-grade 1 piece. It's in a neat little 6/8 style. It's got some nice dynamic contrasts. Students can get the feeling of 6/8. If you want to go into the math with them at this level, you could. I know for myself, I don't. I just let them hear it and feel it. And a really neat piece, I think, to feature at this level. And we could talk about the opera, and usually it's quite brisk and fast, but I'm going to try and play it a little bit slower than usually maybe performed. And this is actually an aria sung by the main character in the opera, I believe. So this is Marche pour les Matelots, arranged by George Lythurst, and the composer is Marin Marais. And am I on original sound? Let's get that on. Okay. in this particular piece, the students don't have to go that fast. I tend to play things through quickly just to get the length of the line out there and that kind of thing. But you can hear it's a nice approachable piece. The pre-grade 1 album is going to have about 30 pieces in it, or maybe somewhere between 24 and 30 pieces. I can't remember exactly what the number is. But really good for those students that aren't quite at that grade 1 level yet. You're working through the end of your beginner method. You're trying to bridge that gap, if there is one in your case, to the grade 1. These are pieces that you can insert in there and use along the way to get students to maybe reading outside of hand positions and other struggles and things that you come up at that level.
I believe there's a movie that goes with this one.
Is there really?
Yeah, I'll just.
Yeah. Oh, right in the app.
Marin Marais was a French composer and viol player who lived from 1656 to 1728. He was a prominent figure in the French music scene and made significant contributions to the development of French Baroque music.
There you can see one of the original scores.
Okay. So that's a neat video. If you're on SuperScore, you can actually click on that video within there. Andrew, you produced that and put that together?
Yes. My daughter Sheree and I do them.
Okay. That's really neat. And his music we don't really hear a lot of. It's rather early Baroque. There are Renaissance and even medieval elements in there in this one. At first, when I first heard it, I thought it was a medieval tune until I saw the composer's name. I thought, oh no, I know that. That's early Baroque. But if you ever look up his music, like for two viol de gambas, really ornate and florid and interesting and almost hard to follow along. I've sat through a concert of his music once, and it was incredibly fascinating and interesting and improvisatory, and just sort of blew my mind. Not quite like this, but it really can open a neat discussion to a neat composer we don't think much about. So that's pre-grade 1. And then going on to grade 1, what did I choose here? I chose a Minuetto in C, that's what we call it, by Anna Bon di Venezia. And this one was, not really arranged, but the edits are done by Sandra Mogensen, whom we've had on the webinar quite a while ago, a couple of years ago. And it comes from one of her publications. We're going to include it in the in the Mosaics series. And I've got a copy here I'm going to play from. And this one we can talk about articulation a lot. You can see here there are some slurs. We don't put any staccato dots in, but it opens up that whole question about how we treat Baroque music at the keyboard. And we'll go into quite a bit of detail in that later in the fall. But I'll just give you a little idea about what we're thinking here, and I'll talk a little bit about it and maybe answer some of your questions in terms of how you can use the score from the series to interpret Baroque music in the way that you want or the way that you're hearing it. Than that for a minuet. I probably could have taken that even a lot slower in retrospect. A minuet tempo is something that's unhurried. Sometimes we talk with our students about, the minuet is a 500-year-old art form. The women would be wearing these large hoop dresses with these frames underneath them. They couldn't move quickly. Lots of toe pointing and usually done between a man and a lady and with partners and doing very careful steps. And the man is there to support her doing turns and toe pointing and that kind of thing. So we can't necessarily go too fast. The articulation is such, and you can see we've edited it very carefully, where eighth notes can be joined. Generally quarter notes are not joined. And part of that is just to simply reflect the articulation of the music of the time, where notes were separated more, whether it was the harpsichord or the string players or lots of tonguing in the woodwinds. The idea we take as keyboard players is more from the string players, and the idea that they had a bow that was curved so that when you got to the end of the bow, the sound would naturally lift, and they wouldn't connect a lot of notes all in one bow like we do in romantic playing. But there's a lot of this sawing back and forth. A lot of the time every note is a different bow direction. So when you watch people playing on period instruments from the Baroque period, there is a lot of this back and forth all of the time. And so as keyboard players, that's what we're trying to imitate. In general, the closer the notes are together and the faster they are, in other words, eighth notes, the more we can play them legato. And the further the notes are apart and more longer values, the more detached they can be. And so you hear me doing different things there. And sometimes even according to the slurs there, like the beginning of the second line of measure 9, I'll play that opening D at the beginning of the second half, and I'll play the D staccato, and then I'll join 4 notes, and then I won't even connect that to the F because it wouldn't have been possible on the string instrument. And so a lot of it is just a dialect we're listening for. And a lot of times in the left hand, that's imitating the cello player, again with the same convex shaped bow that was constantly changing directions. Those are the reasons I try to get in students' mind for how we articulate Baroque music. And you can see on this score here, it's nice there aren't a lot of slurs there. You can certainly join some of the notes together if you want. But in terms of performing for an exam, our examiners are not listening for exactly the articulation on the page because back then there probably wasn't any. It just depends, okay? And so editors, we go in and we add slurs and sometimes dots, staccato dots and things like that, but we're trying to keep these relatively clean so that you can make your own suggestions. And especially when it comes to the Baroque style and even the classical style music, I'll demonstrate with Beethoven again in a little bit, you're not held to the articulation that's on the page. And again, we'll hold more webinars and answer your questions for those of you that may have those questions in terms of, well, how do you decide what to do? And so that's what I think this piece gives us a really good little look at. There are dynamics there too. I wasn't always following the dynamics closely, but trying to create some difference. We have to talk about terraced dynamics in Baroque music where we have layers of loud and layers of soft to imitate perhaps the whole chamber orchestra playing at once and then maybe a soloist playing by themselves. That was more or less how they created dynamics in Baroque music, adding lots of players and then having a soloist. And we can imitate that at the piano because we have that power on the instrument. Then the other thing that comes to mind when we think there was dynamics, there was articulation, ornamentation and repeats. Students do not have to do repeats on our exams, but we do allow it only for Baroque style music. That's what our latest classical syllabus says. And the idea was that if you do the repeats in the Baroque music, the idea is that you would ornament the second time by adding trills and things. At this level, we don't expect that at all. I added a few trills, or tried to, on the repeats just to give you an idea of what might happen. And again, it's not hard and fast, and we're not notating those trills for you, especially at these lower levels. So if anyone has any questions about that, feel free to throw them in the Q&A and let me know what you think, or in the chat box if you just have some feedback for how we're approaching all of this. And I'll move on to the next piece here. This is from grade 2. It's the Lullaby by Angelina Gibson. I believe you have that there, Andrew.
Yes, I do. Oh, I'm looking in the wrong grade.
I'm going to pull it up on my iPad here and play from that. This is a really neat piece that I liked right away when I heard it.
Has a very contemporary sound. I think a lot of students will really like this one. So Angelina is just published this year, and her husband will have stuff in the more advanced books.
Kevin, is that his name?
Yes, he's been selected.
Okay, so we can see the lullaby on the screen there, a very legato style piece. A little bit on the easier side maybe for grade 3, but there are some stylistic things I think here that oh no, sorry, this is grade 2.
Yes.
Yeah, no, this gets solidly into grade 2. I take that back. So this is the lullaby. that gives you an idea of how neat that is. Nice lullaby, almost a lilting feel because it's in 3/4 time. And some of the things I'm thinking about here, I mean, the use of the pedal throughout. I like to use the pedal all the time, and we just simply give that indication the composer does at the beginning. And so I'm a little lenient on my pedal right now. It's squeaking so badly, I don't know if you could hear it. You probably hear it a couple times, so I'm being really careful with it so that I don't, drive myself nuts. The fermatas, taking full time. Sometimes as you ease into the end of the phrase, you can employ some rubato to relax the tempo a little bit and offer that flexibility. The dynamics are on full display here. There's this light sort of floating piano idea. And then you get this rich sound where I'm really digging in with my right hand, and it shows students how to do that with a lot of arm weight in the mezzo forte without getting heavy, and how to do those inflections. It's a really great piece for that. I think it fits perfectly into grade 2. And so I think a lot of students are going to enjoy that. You can see at the end, if you're able to see my hands, I'm not sure that you are actually, but I was changing the fingering a bit. I don't try to play that all with my right hand, because and then I got to jump down an octave quickly. I could do it, but I just found that it was much more secure. If I've got a free hand, I'm going to play the first D with my left hand and then overlap my right hand in there, so I don't have to sweat so much to try and play pianissimo in those figures at the very end. And then the very last chord is written in the score just for left hand. I found it kind of awkward to play those 3 notes, that sort of E sus2 chord in E minor with just the left hand. So what I did is I played the E with my left hand, and then the F sharp and the B with my right hand, so that I could better control the pianissimo, and I could make it sound clearer. I could try and play the B a little louder than the other 2 that way. And that also fits the shape of my hand better, with finger 5 on a white key, finger 2 up on a black key. Get the left hand out of the way, and both hands sharing that gesture. I found worked really well too. Those things we don't notate. Composers often aren't able to notate. They leave that up to the individual performer. And so I'll talk a bit about fingering in the last piece, but this is one thing. We are offering fingering in a lot of these, but sometimes you have to be able to adjust and look at those notes and say, what makes sense here? And how should I do it with this student? And each student's going to be a little different depending on the size of their hands and how well their hands even work together a lot of the time. I think it's important to consider. Okay, and then let's go on to grade 3, and we're going to feature in this one a piece by Beethoven, an écossaise that you may have heard before. I don't think I have, or I think I have, but it certainly hasn't been published in a while, I didn't think. And so I'm just going to pull that up. And I don't think we have this to put on the screen for you today, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. I've got it here. Let's just see if it'll come up. But a typical écossaise, Scottish dance. It's in 2/4 time, and it's got this difference in articulation between legato and staccato becomes really important, and also dynamic variety and how to handle that. I think I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And when you see the score later, when we get the books published, you'll be able to understand that you can change these things a little bit. You're not held to exactly what's on the score. The other thing that'll come up in this one is fingering. It's in E flat major, and so I'm using a rather unconventional fingering because I'm okay with my thumb on a black key. But you can take a look at that if you can see it, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So this is the écossaise, Beethoven. It's marked Allegro con brio in this version. Clumsy to play it. I find it a bit clumsy. I don't know it that well yet. So you hear me struggling in a couple places. But in terms of the fingering, with E flat major, there's a fingering that will allow you to avoid your thumb on the black key. I tried it with my thumb on the black key for a while, and I kind of like it because there are these accents in the score. Whether those are Beethoven's or not, we don't know. We still got to get to the bottom of that in the editing process. But there's a difference between what is detached, what is accented, and then what is slurred or joined together. And I find with my thumb on the black key in a lot of places, I can demonstrate that a lot easier. but also because my hands are a little bit more curved maybe than some students might be. And so this is one where I can't see any two students using exactly the same fingering, but the fingering to decide on what it'll be will be absolutely crucial. Turn my little sound off. I know there was some kind of buzzing going on in the background. Okay, that stifles it. And so in this one, Giocoso, sort of humorously, we can hear that. And then the idea, I think there are slurs in this particular edition over the left hand that I don't really care for or like. And so I tried it both ways, and there are staccato dots as well. I think in our version, when it gets published, it's not going to quite look like that. We don't need staccato dots over all the left hand notes. It's just understood that if something doesn't have a slur in Beethoven, it will be slightly detached. And so lots of decisions to make there in terms of where you put the dynamics. We will have a version again in the score, but you're not held to that on exams or at any time. The dynamics, and you'll look at any sort of source file for these things in Beethoven's time, and you will find different even different fingerings with different dynamics and different articulation markings depending on the edition and where it was published and who was doing the editing. It just, there was never an urtext edition necessarily. So people put a lot of time and effort into that kind of work. But sometimes we still know that even by Beethoven, we're still not entirely sure over what those things would be, as we are nowadays with modern composers. The further you go into time, the more hard and stone that gets. And so again, in the fall, we can talk about that and some of those differences and get some ground rules down in terms of how to interpret the scores that you're going to see in the Mosaics collection. So anyone have any feedback on that or any questions? Feel free to, let me know here in the chat box or the Q&A, and we can do our best to answer for you what the direction we want to take with the series in terms of editing. There really are many sets of eyes on all of the music, not just myself and Andrew and George, but there's going to be others that have input on this as well. And so we want to bring you something that makes pedagogical sense, but also even in the preamble, we hope to publish that you have a fair bit of leeway, and here's what to engage with the scores on your own terms that way, but still honoring the performance practice of the time period. And we hope to do some educating on that in the fall for those that want that kind of information. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
This sounds pretty complete.
Yep.
I think this will be the most advanced system that you can get. When we include the streaming and the super score and the new hard copies, I think it'll be a pretty fabulous collection of things for students.
Yep. It is just one book. I know a lot of people get used to the idea of studies. We've abandoned the sort of concept and the terminology of study or etude quite a while ago at Conservatory Canada. And so you'll see in this book, it's going to be categorized into, well, we still have to talk about that, I guess, but group 1, group 2, group 3, we use that terminology for Baroque, classical, romantic, modern music by the time you get to grade 8. But even grades 1 to 5 is just group 1 and group 2 for an exam. Students play Baroque classical style, or they play romantic modern style. You have a fair bit of choice on what to do there. So you won't see any of the traditional studies. They're going to be incorporated right into this book. And I mean, you're going to see pieces, the number of pieces is going to be between 30 and 40 pieces per album. So again, it's going to be that number that you're used to. Our books are a little thicker than maybe some of the others you might see out there. And hopefully the price point, meets your needs, and your students will be encouraged to buy the books that way, whether it's in hard copy or through the SuperScore app. Again, coming back to that, if students have an iPad, they can really replace the hard copy nowadays by purchasing the album digitally and then being able to work with those interactive features rather than the hard copy. That's certainly an option that I think more people ought to take a look at these days. Okay, questions. Go ahead and type your questions in. Wendy's asking, are there plans for SuperScore to move to Apple computers or likely to stay only on the iPad? Andrew, I know you can answer that.
There's no plan at the moment. I heard the new Mac Airs might have the right kind of chip to do it, but I don't think there's any plans for that. George could answer that.
And George, we could bring you back on if you want to answer that. Feel free to come back on if you're still there.
Rephrase the question, Andrew.
Do we have plans to put SuperScore on Mac Air?
Oh, we have SuperScore running in-house on the Mac. Um, we don't have any plans in the immediate future to make it public. There's some complicated things to work out in terms of having purchases that are made on one device get transferred over to another and so forth. So I can't make any promises about the future, but the technology is there, certainly.
And then while you're here, George, this other question that keeps coming up. What prevents you from developing the app for other technologies other than Apple? Because a lot of people don't like the cost of the Apple product, let's say.
Well, it's unfortunate that the other primary tablet out there in the world is based on the Google operating system. It uses JavaScript, and it's to write applications for it natively is just a completely different language, and it's a different animal. And not only that, the company that controls the operating system, which is Google, is not the company that makes the hardware. And so you also get into a mixed situation that's very hard for developers to deal with. And the coding of SuperScore and music notation and performance is highly complex. So it's a place where we want to get to eventually. I just can't make any public statements about when we might get there.
Yeah, it would take quite a bit. It sounds like, I mean, Apple really does have somewhat of a monopoly on this market in terms of apps and mobile devices.
And Apple was really out front with developer tools in this regard. And if you were to survey both platforms just for music apps in general, Apple's been the hands down favorite amongst developers.
Yeah.
I've asked students, do you have an iPad? They'll say no. And then I find out their parents own one. So a lot of families do have iPads already. And I'm just surprised my students would say, no, I don't have one, when they do have one.
Yeah.
And I
So,
think as time goes on, you'll find that parents will be updating to a newer iPad for themselves, and there's a cast off that should be available for a youngster in the family.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the technology. Anyone have any other questions for us about the Mosaics Collection series? We hope to have it out in the summer at some point. We're not going to make any promises yet. I know, we have our own internal deadline at the end of June, but things happen, things come up, so it might take us a little bit longer, but you can bet by September you will be able to see these things in the stores. You'll be able to order it from Harbridge Publishing House online. Do you have any other, where are the books going to be available, Andrew, when they finally come out?
well, all the Long and McQuaid stores, and we supply a lot of smaller establishments as well. And plus the websites we have, Harbridge Publishing and Deborah Wanless Music. Our shipping fees are very competitive as well.
Right. Yeah, I see a good question here. Before we get to that, we do have this teacher survey going on right now at Conservatory Canada. And if you haven't filled it out already, I'm just going to put a link in the chat box here, because if you do that, again, if you want a chance, we're going to give away 3 complete sets of this in a couple of weeks when the survey closes. So those of you joining us here live, go ahead and check out that survey and leave your name and email address at the end of the survey. And we're going to make that draw in a couple of weeks. You may win the complete set. We'll get that shipped out to you. In the meantime, how long will students be able to use the Millennium Series? The new Millennium Series, you will be able to use it indefinitely, actually. Because at Conservatory Canada, we don't change over our repertoire. We keep expanding the repertoire open. And Andrew, on the contemporary side, is a big part of that for us by updating the contemporary repertoire list all the time. And in terms of for the classical piano syllabus, all the repertoire in the new Millennium Series, you'll still be able to use anytime. Just ignore all of those requirements in the back of the books, because they became defunct several years ago now. We still have people that fall to that. They don't realize that our online syllabus is the only real definitive source. And so that's one of the big reasons we need to get away from the new Millennium Series, is it has old syllabus information. In the new books, you will not find the new syllabus information, because we're not always updating it, but if we want to, it's a lot easier and cleaner just to keep that in one spot digitally on our website that we can update as we need to, and we find errors and things like that. But you won't find the syllabus information in the new books. But for now, keep using the old books, keep using old repertoire. If you have repertoire that isn't in any of the books or on our longer lists, just email a copy of the piece to us, and we can appraise it for free. and you can still use it on an exam, especially the contemporary repertoire. So and a lot of you take advantage of that. It's very easy for us to do, and we're happy to do that so that students can play music that's most relevant to them.
And I believe the new series has no repeat material from from the Millennium series.
Pretty much. Yeah, the only one we're copying, I think, is the Odd Clementi movement, right? But
Yes.
you're going to see the Odd Clementi Sonatina from Opus 36 that's been revised by Arthur Uhl and published by George and Superscore. We're going to use some of those movements just because they're so cool. It's neat to hear different versions of those things, and I can't wait to see those in print and see how they work for everybody. Okay, so we're almost at the top of the hour. I think we're going to stop there for today, everyone. Those of you here in the live Zoom audience, though, feel free to hang on and we can get a little bit more informal chat, but we're going to stop the YouTube stream now and the recording. And we'll be in touch by email over the next few weeks to let you know exactly when this is available, to give you updates over the summer. I know a lot of you do planning throughout the summer for your students for the fall. Feel free to reach out to me if there's any way that we can answer questions for you or factor into those plans for the fall. We keep talking a lot about digital badges, and I appreciate your curiosity with those. We're going to keep marketing those quite heavily. You're going to see those on the back covers, in fact, of the Mosaics collection. We're going to talk all about those again in the fall too. So we'll keep up these webinars probably starting in mid-September, if not earlier, because we want to hit you with the publications, get you excited about those as much as you can. You never know, we may even find time in late August to do a webinar to really launch. This is just a sneak peek. It's not the actual launch of the series yet. We still have a lot of work to do over the coming months. But thanks for your time and attention, everyone. Check out the replays on the YouTube channel. George, thanks for checking in with us today. We really appreciate your involvement in all of this and everything that you do from a technological and an editing point of view. And Andrew, you know, you're the one that seeded this whole idea for us and made it possible for Conservatory Canada. And so your contributions are just incredibly invaluable to us. And we're so grateful that we were able to publish a new series with Harbridge Publishing House. And we look forward to its fruition. And thanks for being here